afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series, Litigation Landscape under GST, Part 2. Thank you for joining in very large number. I feel based on number of participants, it seems all of us are expecting huge litigation in GST regime. GST regime was supposed to be a good and simple tax regime with least of the litigations, but based on last 3 years experience in GST, it seems we are heading towards next 30 years of litigation. Starting with today's session, we'll be covering input tax credits, refunds, adjustments, interest, and detention, seizure, and confiscation of goods. Starting with input tax credit. So input tax credit, earlier it was mod VAT credit, SENVAT credit, starting from 1994. And under pre-GST regime, it was a most disputed topic. And unfortunately, the complexities continue in GST regime as well. So today we'll be covering various disputes which are likely to come up in GST regime on input tax credit side. Starting with conditions for availing ITC, entitlement of credit. Credit is available on supply of goods or services which are used or intended to be used in the course or furtherance of business. So I'll pause here for a while. So if you see, the definition or the eligibility criteria is very wide. It covers anything and everything for the business purposes. In the course means during normal running of the business. Furtherance means to expand or improve the business. So the government has kept the eligibility criteria as very wide, which is a very welcome step. But yes, in the subsequent slides, we'll discuss this along with the restrictions under section 17(5), where despite this wider eligibility criteria, the government has put certain restrictions. Therefore, to start with, yes, input tax credit is available on everything which are used for business purposes. Coming further to conditions. So as a recipient, first condition, of course, is that the recipient should receive goods and services. Second, he should possess a valid document. The law also provides the mandatory details in such documents, which is the GST registration number of both buyer and seller, description of goods or services, value, tax amount, place of supply, where interstate supply is there. Third important condition, that the recipient should furnish the return. So this is the part of the statute that unless recipient furnishes its return, it cannot claim credit. To this, there is an attendant condition which has been put under Rule 36(4) of CGST rules. Rule 36(4) provides that if the supplier does not upload the documents in its GSTR1, then ITC will not be available to the recipient. So Rule 36(4) provides that the recipient can claim ITC up to 110% on documents uploaded. So based on this restriction, auto-generated mails are being sent to the taxpayers for violation of this restriction, that the total ITC taken does not match with the credit getting reflected in GSTR 2A. In our view, this condition per se is invalid. The reason is that neither this is flowing from the statute, and subsequently we'll discuss that government has also put a condition that tax should be paid in the government account for availing ITC. Therefore, this condition contradicts the condition of payment of tax, for the reason that this is only talking about uploading of invoices in GSTR1. This is not decisive as to whether the supplier has paid the tax or not. So theoretically, there can be a situation that the invoices are uploaded by supplier in GSTR1, but he does not pay the tax. So based on this condition, I may be entitled for credit, but I may violate another condition of non-payment of tax by the supplier. And basis this rule per se has been challenged before Delhi and Gujarat High Court as being ultra virus. So our suggestion to all of you is that yes, this condition is part of the statute book. You should endeavor to comply with it. But if for any genuine reasons you are not able to comply with it, you can always challenge the validity of this condition. Moving ahead, the next condition of payment of tax. So this is the most controversial condition for availing ITC, and we foresee that this condition itself will lead to a lot of disputes between the tax department and taxpayers, because the first step or the first set of show cause notices which GST authorities will issue is that these are your suppliers who have not paid the tax. So you are not entitled to claim ITC on this. If we link this with the previous regime, there was no such condition under excise or service tax laws. In fact, under excise or service tax laws, the courts have clearly held that a bona fide purchaser of goods can claim the credit even if tax has not been paid by the supplier. But yes, this condition used to exist under VAT laws. Under VAT laws, there are multiple High Court judgments, at least half a dozen High Court judgments, including Delhi High Court judgment affirmed by Supreme Court, in which all the High Courts have read down this condition and they have allowed credit to bona fide buyer of goods as long as, even if the supplier does not pay the tax. But yes, there is an adverse Bombay High Court ruling in case of Mahalakshmi, again affirmed by Supreme Court, which took the contrary view. In our view, the favorable High Court rulings lay down the correct legal proposition, and therefore this condition is also invalid. Coming to GST regime, in both Delhi and Calcutta High Court, this condition has been challenged for the reason that apart from being ultra virus, there is no mechanism in which the supplier can verify as to whether the recipient can verify whether supplier has paid tax or not. Moving ahead to the next condition, that the recipient should make payment to the supplier within 180 days. In our view, even though this is a condition, but again, it does not serve any purpose if the condition number 4, which is coming on your screen, is valid and the supplier has paid the tax. That should be end of it. How the government is concerned with the commercial dealings between the supplier and the recipient, and as to whether recipient has made payment to supplier or not. Moving ahead, restrictions under section 17.5. So section 17.5 lists out goods and services which are ineligible for credit, starting with motor vehicle having capacity up to 13 persons, leasing, renting or hiring of motor vehicles sitting capacity up to 13 persons. So pertinent to note that the restriction is only for the vehicles which are up to 13 persons. So if you purchase vehicles having capacity more than 13 persons, so say for example a bus, etc., or if you take such bigger vehicles on lease, rent, hiring, there is no credit restriction at all. Secondly, the restriction is only for vehicles meant for transportation of passengers. Therefore, if you purchase or lease or hire or rent any vehicle which is meant for transportation of goods, then also credit restriction does not apply. Moving ahead, food, beverages, outdoor catering, beauty treatment, these are ineligible for credit. So for food, outdoor catering, or all these things, it is pertinent that this restriction does not apply where there is a statutory requirement to provide these things. So if a factory covered under Factories Act provides food to its workers, which is a statutory obligation under Factories Act, then this restriction is not applicable. Similarly, drinking water at first place is not a beverage. Secondly, there are requirements both under Factories Act and Shops and Establishments Act to provide drinking water facility. So those are also eligible for credit. Life and health insurance, membership of club, health and fitness center, gifts, free samples, goods lost, stolen, destroyed, written off, construction of immovable property, personal consumption. So I'll halt here at personal consumption. So for a company which is carrying out its business or profession, etc., there's nothing like personal consumption because every expenditure which is incurring is for its business purposes only. There is plethora of judgments under income tax regime stating that in respect of a company or a business concern, there is nothing like a personal consumption. Lastly, tax paid on account of fraud, suppression, etc. So similar restriction used to exist under pre-GST regime also, that if the supplier has paid tax due to fraud, credit is not available to the recipient. Now, after broadly telling what are the restrictions, now we'll come to the litigious issues in each one of them. Starting with motor vehicles. The restriction is not applicable when the vehicle is used for further supply of such motor vehicle or transportation of passengers or imparting training on driving such vehicle. So with each of such restrictions, we'll be discussing the litigious issues and the advanced rulings or circulars which have come till now. Starting with the advanced rulings of Kerala and Maharashtra in respect of demo cars. So demo cars are cars which you will find at all car showrooms in which you can take a test drive and thereafter you can decide whether to buy a car or not. So in these rulings, the authority held that these are used in course or furtherance of business. Authority also held that these are further supplied on payment of GST. On both these two criteria, so even though these showrooms purchase motor vehicle having sitting capacity up to 13 persons, the ITC was allowed. If you see the second criteria adopted by these authorities, which is further supplied on payment of GST, if this logic is taken, which seems to be apparently correct also, then this will be applicable to all the vehicles which even a business entity is purchasing. So say for example, a manufacturing company purchases vehicles for its directors. Eventually, after the vehicle outlives its utility, it will be sold on payment of GST only. Therefore, to that extent, these rulings have allowed ITC on all type of motor vehicles, and this logic can be extended. Moving ahead, the ruling of Maharashtra AAAR in case of cash carry vans. So you'll find for all these ATMs, banks, etc., there are cash carry vans which are secured, which deliver cash. So under GST regime, cash qualifies as goods. So the authority held that because these vehicles are used for transportation of cash, which qualifies as goods under GST regime, ITC will be available. Moving ahead, lease of trucks to GTA. So the authority held that this restriction is applicable only for transportation of passenger and not on goods transport agency. Therefore, for the activity of leasing of trucks to a goods transport agency, credit was allowed. Then this is Uttarakhand AR relating to ITC on JCB, dumper, and tipper, which are basically earth moving equipments. The authority rightly concluded that these vehicles do not qualify as motor vehicle under Motor Vehicles Act, and therefore ITC is available. Then there is an adverse ruling of West Bengal relating to ITC on ambulance. So the authority held that pre-February 2019, because this ambulance was purchased, it was not a statutory requirement. Therefore, ITC is not available. This ruling is correct. Moving ahead, now in this slide we'll be covering multiple rulings relating to passenger transportation. So these are typical vehicles which are used for transportation of employees from their residence to office or vice versa. So MPAR allowed ITC, West Bengal disallowed, Haryana it allowed on buses but disallowed on cars. HP it did not allow. So the key issue for debate is to identify the nature of service. So in most of these cases, the service under consideration was that if I have to pick my employees in the morning from their designated stops and the vehicle brings them to the plant and does vice versa in the evening, what is the nature of the service? So the most of these adverse rulings they held that this is a leasing, renting, or hiring, which in our view is totally incorrect reasoning. The nature of these services is essentially passenger transportation because leasing, renting, or hiring these presuppose existence of the whole vehicle coming into the control of the service recipient, whereas the impugned services were more in the nature of door-to-door transportation of passengers. So here the contract under consideration was not getting the vehicle. It was a service of bringing employees to my place and dropping them in the evening. So in our view, these rulings have failed to correctly classify the nature of services, which was passenger transportation, and thus they have wrongly disallowed ITC on these services. And again, as we discussed a few minutes back, that if these services relate to vehicles more than 13 persons, then there is no dispute at all. Lastly, the same logic can get extended to Uber or Ola or all these private taxis also, where the nature of arrangement is a door-to-door transportation. So suppose you book Uber from your residence to your office, it's a passenger transportation service. Whereas if you take it on rent, say for a particular number of hours, etc., then it will not qualify as passenger transportation. Moving ahead, life or health insurance, the restriction does not apply when it is used for making outward supply of same category or where there is a statutory obligation on employer to provide such insurance. Three rulings are relevant, two of Maharashtra and one of UP. So these rulings related to provision of medical insurance for employees' parents. So the authority held that this does not constitute supply, and basis that even the credit was disallowed. In our view, these rulings are incorrect to the extent that they hold these are not supply. In our view, these qualify as supply, and therefore, to that extent, ITC also should have been available. Coming to the next restriction, gifts, free samples, goods lost, stolen, destroyed, written off. So we have first set of rulings of Maharashtra, a couple of rulings, and Gujarat. So the issue related to goods distributed under promotional schemes. So these are very prevalent in FMCG, consumer durables. If you buy 100 quantity from me, I will give you 5 free, etc. So these first set of rulings, they held that whenever a company distributes goods under promotional scheme, it qualifies as gift and therefore ITC is not available. In our view, whenever there is a contractual obligation to provide the goods. So in the example which I gave, if there is an offer given to me that if I buy 100 units, I get 5 free, then it's a contractual obligation. It cannot qualify as gift. So to that extent, these rulings are incorrect. But we have a favorable, again, Maharashtra ruling in which an additional carton of cigarette was supplied in the same price. So the authority held that the cost has been factored in the price charged for outward supply and therefore ITC is available. Importantly, that CBIC also has issued circular in March 2019 clarifying that ITC on such goods is available. The next issue relates to finished goods destroyed during testing. So because if you see the restriction is for goods destroyed. So in this case, the taxpayer was testing the finished goods during which it got destroyed. So the authority held that inputs used in final products and they were not destroyed as such. The authority also held that destroyed means natural and man-made situations and not the destruction like during the course of testing. Therefore, basis that ITC was allowed. In our view, the similar logic can be extended, say for example, samples. So if a taxpayer is giving samples of goods purchased by it, then these are given as samples as such. But if the taxpayer is purchasing raw materials, converting into finished goods, and then giving samples, then the goods on which ITC is taken are not given as samples. So in our view, the restriction of gift, free samples, stolen, etc. will only apply if the goods on which ITC is taken are given as such. Moving ahead, we have Kerala advanced ruling for ITC on CSR activities. So in this case, the taxpayer distributed goods free to flood affected people under CSR scheme. So the authority held that ITC is not available. In our view, this ruling is totally incorrect. So firstly, there is a statutory requirement under Companies Act for companies to undertake CSR activities. Therefore, it cannot be treated as a gift, etc. Secondly, there are rulings under previous regime also which classified CSR activities as activities relating to business. There is sufficient jurisprudence under income tax law also prior to its amendment that these expenses are incurred for the purpose of business. So in our view, ITC on CSR activities is eligible. Moving ahead, the restriction for construction of immovable property. So the exception is for plant machinery, which means apparatus, equipment, and machinery as structural support. Therefore, immovable property is eligible for credit, but if plant and machinery is involved, then the credit will be eligible even if it qualifies as immovable property. So firstly, the whole purpose of GST was to avoid cascading effect of the taxes. Therefore, any taxes which are paid at the procurement stage should be eligible for credit. Therefore, in multiple high courts, the validity of this provision itself is challenged because this is against the whole scheme of GST. So, whenever a company undertakes greenfield or brownfield expansion, then a plant or an office or some premises will get constructed, and there's a significant amount of GST which is spent on that. Important to note that in some of the rulings, the courts have also held that while they have accepted the challenge to the validity of this provision, they have also held that if the constitutional validity of this provision is rejected, then the taxpayer can claim ITC on these services subsequently, irrespective of time limit. Therefore, if any of you are incurring expenses on construction of immovable property, the only simple thing you need to do is challenge the validity of the provision in respective High Court and take an admission order on these lines to allow credit if subsequently the case is decided in your favor. In that case, you need not take credit at this stage and you can keep the issue alive for future. Then we have the ruling in case of safari retreats. So safari retreats was a Odisha High Court judgment relating to construction of mall which was given on rent. So the court noted that the constructed immovable property was used in further taxable supply. So interestingly, the court did not struck down the validity of the provision, but they read it down and allowed the credit. So this matter is presently pending before the Supreme Court. Moving further, Karnataka AAAR. In this case, detachable slidings, glass partitions, which you normally see in offices, were under consideration. The authority ruled that these slidings and partitions can be dismantled without demolishing the civil structure. The authority held these are not immobile property, therefore ITC is available. Embassy Industrial Park, the authority held that ITC is not available on electric works, pumps, pumping systems, lighting system, physical security system, fire system, etc. In our view, this embassy ruling is incorrect because if you see the definition of plant and machinery, it is very wide to cover any apparatus, equipment, plant and machinery, or structural support. Therefore, all these items actually qualify as apparatus or equipment. Then we have Maharashtra ruling in which ITC was allowed on external or internal sewage system, air conditioning work, utility work, waste supply system, fire alarm system, but they disallowed credit on structural supports, plumbing, gardening supply system, dismantling work, etc. So the important thing which becomes relevant is what is meant by plant and machinery. In very layman terms, plant and machinery is an equipment in which you supply certain input and which produces an output. So in a typical construction of factory, warehouse, etc., say the whole electrical installation system, water supply system, etc., in our view, these qualify as plant and machinery, and on that part, taxpayers can claim ITC. Then we have West Bengal AAAR, which held that ITC is not available on lease of land while constructing hotel. They held the 17(5) restriction to supplies which are essential for construction of civil structure. In our view, this ruling is totally incorrect because the restriction is only for construction of immovable property, and these are uh, leasing services which are procured, which does not get covered within the ambit of construction. Coming to personal consumption, we have Maharashtra authority holding that rent-free accommodation for managing director or General Motors is ineligible for credit. In our view, it's totally incorrect because these expenses are incurred in the course of business. We have Tamil Nadu AR, Gujarat AR, Odisha AR, which have disallowed credit on medicines used in in-house hospital maintenance and upkeep of guest house, residential colony, telephones and mobile phones installed at residences and hospitals, etc. In our view, again, all these business expenses were incurred for the purpose of business. There's no element of personal consumption in it, and these should be eligible for ITC. Even in respect of residential colonies, telephones, mobile phones, because if you have, say, a cement or a steel plant which is outside the main city, etc., so provision of these residential colonies and facilities are essential for the business. Secondly, we should also see all these things from the perspective of income tax law also, that because under income tax law, these expenses are deductible being incurred for the purpose of business. So if the deduction is allowed on these expenses under income tax law, same logic should extend here as well. Then we have Maharashtra AAA, which is a favorable AR allowing credit on maintenance of garden inside the factory, healthcare services, purchase of LPG cylinder for canteen, maintenance of guest house, repair and maintenance of shops, construction and maintenance of road, maintenance of unused land. But they denied ITC because these procurements were used for making exempt outward supply. So if you see, even though the government has kept eligible criteria to be very wide as used in the course or furtherance of business, still a very narrow or micro view is being taken by advanced ruling authorities, and in many cases, eligible expenses are not being granted ITC. With this, we move to next part of our webinar, and I'll hand over the session to my colleague Anshika, who will take us through the section of refunds onwards. Over to you, Anshika.
Thank you, Puneet. The second part of the webinar talks about refunds. All fiscal statutes invariably have provisions for recovery of taxes and for refund of taxes which have been excessively paid. Under CGST Act, Section 54 of the CGST Act to Section 58 of the CGST Act deals with refund of taxes. Section 54 provides that provides for refund of unutilized ITC in case of zero rated supplies and in case of inverted tax structure. Further, Section 56 of CGST Act provides for payment of interest wherever the refund has been granted on a delayed basis. 3 years of GST and refund has had its own fate of litigation. Some of the prominent litigations that are being faced by taxpayers are as follows. In the case of Garden Silk Mills Limited, the assessee had filed 6 refund claims on account of SEZ supplies, inverted duty structure, and exports without payment of duty. These refunds were rejected by the authorities. Rule 93 of CGST rule provides that wherever refund is rejected by the authorities, the same shall be recredited to the electronic credit ledger of the assessor. For this purpose, the authority issues a form in format PMT03. In this case, also the authority had issued this form wherein they had been provided for recredit of the unrefunded amount in their electronic credit ledger. However, the authorities had not credited this amount due to absence of any mechanism on GST portal. The taxpayers did follow up with the authorities. However, no resolution was done. Aggrieved by this, the taxpayers filed a writ petition before Telangana High Court, asking for recredit of this amount. The court held that recredit cannot be withheld on account of absence of mechanism on the portal. In case this mechanism is absent, taxpayers should be given an option to take credit manually in return. Basis this ruling, many of the taxpayers can take shelter wherever their refund is not being, wherever the refund which has been denied is not being recredited to their ECL, basis the ground that there is absence of mechanism. The second set of litigations that have arisen under GST is the Rule 89.5 of CGST rules prescribes the formula for computation of refund in case of inverted duty structure. This particular rule defines various terms such as adjusted total turnover, net ITC, or tax payable, etc., for computation of inverted tax refund. Interestingly, the net ITC under this particular rule has been defined as input tax credit on inputs, whereas CGST Act defines the term input tax credit as ITC on procurement of all goods and services. Pertinently, Rule 89.5 restricts credit on input services, whereas the same has already been referred to in CGST Act. It is an established law that wherever a subordinate legislation, that is CGST rules, they run contrary to the main enactment, that is the CGST Act, the main enactment will prevail. Basis this, many writ petitions have been filed before various high courts challenging the wires of Rule 89.5. It will be interesting to note how the issue finally unfolds before various high courts. Another interesting issue under Rule 89.5 is that net ITC also restricts credit on capital goods. However, this issue has not been brought to the attention of the courts yet. It is hopeful that maybe in near future even this issue is brought before the court. The third set of litigations that are arising under refund is that the interest in case of delayed refund is not being granted. So Section 56 provides that interest is applicable from expiry of 60 days from date of receipt of application. That is, wherever their refund is granted beyond 60 days, interest is liable to be paid. Again, this provision has been subjected to litigation. In case of Saraf Natural Stone and Willowwood Chemical, the taxpayer had filed for refund before the authorities. Here, the Rule 90 of CGST rule provides that in case a provisional refund, which is equivalent to 90% of the refund, is granted beyond 7 days, is required to be granted within 7 days, meaning thereby that in this case, the taxpayer was entitled to provisional refund within 7 days from filing of actual refund. However, the taxpayer had not been granted this refund within 7 days. Aggrieved by the same, the taxpayer had filed writ petition before Gujarat High Court. The High Court, the revenue raised the contention that Section 66 is applicable only in case of refunds and not in case of provisional refunds. In this case, the assessee's case involved provisional refund and not the refund which is mentioned in Section 56. Hence, no interest would be granted. The court observed that interest provisions under GST are beneficiary and they are non-discriminatory. Accordingly, if there is a delay in grant of any refund, interest is liable to be paid on the same. It finally held that consequently it allowed that simple interest at the rate of 9% per annum shall be eligible to the taxpayer. Again, taxpayers who are receiving their refunds, like delayed refunds, they can take shelter under this ruling. Another issue that the taxpayers are facing is there many a times it happens that the taxpayer files a refund application. Thereafter, a deficiency memo is being issued by the authorities. After curing the defects, the assessee files for a fresh refund. In case, and the issue arises that interest accrues from what date, whether it is the date of filing of original application or whether it is the date when the deficiency has been cured. In case of Gimpex, the Karnataka High Court held that interest accrues from the date of filing of original application and not from date of resubmission of refund claims after curing deficiency. This particular ruling pertains to the custom laws. It will be interesting to note to what extent this ruling can be applied even under GST laws. The third topic of the webinar is adjustments. Section 77 of the CGST Act and Section 19 of the IGST Act provides for refund wherever the tax has been paid under wrong head. It further provides it also addresses the issue that in case the assessee has paid tax under the wrong head, refund is available for the amount which has been wrongly paid. It further says that no interest on belated payment is accrues. This can be explained as follows. Suppose a taxpayer has a liability of CGST and SGST. However, the taxpayer inadvertently pays IGST instead of the CGST and SGST. As per the provisions of Section 77, the taxpayer can claim refund of IGST and thereafter pay CGST and SGST. Whether the interest liability accrues, the answer is no, which has already been provided in Section 77. Again, this provision had been subjected to litigation in case of Aditya and Ambadi Traders, Kerala High Court, and Sri Nanak Ferroalloys. In this case, the assessee had paid the tax wrongly under the head SGST instead of IGST. The authorities issued a notice to the taxpayer requesting for payment of right amount of tax, that is the right amount of SGST. The taxpayer requested the authorities to adjust the amount as he had paid the tax under wrong head. However, the same had been turned down by the authorities. The authorities held that the assessee should first file a refund of SGST which had been wrongly paid and thereafter make payment of IGST. Aggrieved by the same, the taxpayer filed a writ before the High Court. The High Court observed that in terms of Section 77 and in terms of GST Refund Rules 2017, Rule 4 thereunder provides that an order in RFD 07 needs to be issued where an amount which is liable to be refunded is consequently adjusted against an outstanding liability. Meaning thereby that if an assessee has an outstanding liability and simultaneously an amount which needs to be refunded, the authorities can adjust the amount which is liable to be refunded against the amount which is outstanding. Taking shelter under Section 77, read with Rule 4 of GST refund rules, the court held that amount wrongly paid under one head can be adjusted against another head. It further held that no interest on payment, that no interest liability arises on payment of correct tax. Again, the taxpayers can take shield under this under these rulings wherever the tax has been paid wrongly and simultaneously there is an outstanding liability of the tax. The fourth topic of the webinar is interest. Interest is one of the topics under GST laws which has a narrative history. Section 50 of the CGST Act provides that whenever a tax liability has not been paid or short paid by a taxpayer, interest is liable to be paid on the same. Interestingly, the portal doesn't allow for partial payment of tax and only allows for complete payment. This can be illustrated as suppose a taxpayer has a liability of say 10 lakhs. The taxpayer has an amount of 9 lakhs in his electronic credit ledger. The remaining amount, that is a 1 lakh is liable to be paid through electronic cash ledger. Unfortunately, the taxpayer doesn't have 1 lakh in his kitty. Accordingly, he is not able to pay the same. The portal doesn't allow for payment of 9 lakhs as well. In this scenario, suppose the taxpayer makes a payment at a later date. The question arises whether interest liability arises on the gross amount, that is the amount of 10 lakhs which was due to the which was due by the taxpayer, or the amount which was payable, which was not available in the electronic credit ledger and which was payable through cash ledger. The government understood this anomaly, and accordingly, White press release dated December 22, 2018, they proposed amendment in section 50, wherein they proposed that interest liability arises only on the amount that is payable from the cash ledger. That is, in our case, interest liability arises only on 1 lakh, which is payable from the cash ledger, and not the amount which is already there in the electronic credit ledger. This created a chaos amongst taxpayers, and the courts were soon flooded with litigations. One of them being the case of Mega Engineering. On April 18, 2019, Telangana High Court, in case of Mega Engineering, held that interest is applicable on gross liability, that is in our case 10 lakhs, without setting off ITC. It further observed that ITC is available only when claim made in return. It further observed that amendment proposed by GST Council not effective, meaning thereby that the taxpayer is liable to pay interest on entire 10 lakhs and 9 lakhs, which irrespective of the fact that the taxpayer has 9 lakhs in his electronic credit ledger. Again, this ruling created unrest amongst the taxpayers, and on August 2019, the government inserted a proviso in section 50. By this proviso, the government clarified that interest is payable only on net tax liability, that is amount which is paid from the electronic cash ledger. In our case, the amount of 1 lakh. To the joy of taxpayers, in the case of Reflex Industries, the Madras High Court on January 6 also held that interest is applicable on net tax liability. It further observed that the proviso which was inserted to section 50 was to correct the anomaly. It was clarificatory in nature and hence applicable retrospectively. It also highlighted that the amendment has been introduced to aid of taxpayers. Surprisingly, Madras High Court failed to acknowledge the point that the proviso which had been inserted in section 50 had not been notified. The taxpayers' joy was short-lived, and the CBIC on February 10, 2020 issued a letter clarifying that interest is payable on gross tax liability. It further observed that the amendment which had been made in section 50 had not been notified. Post this, various tweets have been issued by CBIC on a similar point. This issue still hovers over the industry and is also giving rise to numerous litigations. Because of the issue of confusion over payment of gross tax liability, net tax liability, the department has been issuing notice to the taxpayers left, right, and center. Once one such issue had also come in case of LC Infra, Karnataka High Court, Godavari Commodities, Jharkhand High Court, and Mahadev Construction Company. The issue in these three cases was that, as explained earlier, the issue of gross tax liability, net tax liability still remains a mystery. Due to this, the government is issuing notices to taxpayers. Surprisingly, these notices are just a one-page notice which specifies the amount of tax that is payable. It further directs that such amount is payable by the taxpayer within 3 days of issuance of such letter, It also comes with a rider that in case this amount is not being discharged, the bank accounts of the assessee will be attached and freezed. In these three cases, the taxpayer received such notices. They challenged the wires of these notices due to the fact that Section 73 under the CGST Act provides that the non-payment or short payment of any tax liability can only be ascertained upon issuance of a show cause notice, which is adjudicated and the taxpayer is given an opportunity of being heard. Until and unless this procedure is followed, no interest liability or tax liability can be fastened or concluded over an assessee. This process has not been this process was not being followed in such cases, and the taxpayers were only told that this amount is payable. Accordingly, the court held that these uh, these notices that had been issued by the department are in gross violation of principles of natural justice, requiring not only to show cause but also an opportunity of being heard to the taxpayers. And these notices should be treated as show cause notices and not recovery letters. Now I hand over to the session to DK.
Thank you, Puneet. Thank you. That are there under GST. This is of very prime importance for all the attendees because their businesses would be facing these issues day in and day out. I'll cover the next topic, which is I believe that most of the litigation that have come up under GST is relating to detention, seizure, and confiscation of goods. Section 129 and 130 of the CGST Act deal with these provisions in the terms that they start, which provides that notwithstanding anything contained under CGST Act or SGST Act, these provisions prevail. These are self-contained codes. So what 129 says is that whenever any person is transporting goods or stores any goods while the goods are in transit and which is in contravention of any of the provisions of the law, then such goods and the conveyance in which the goods are transported both will be liable for detention or seizure. Goods and conveyance are liable for confiscation and penalty if a person either supplies goods or receives goods in contravention of law, or does not account for goods liable to tax, or he supplies goods without seeking registration, and lastly uses such conveyance for carriage of goods in contravention of law. So in either of these situations, the goods and the conveyance will also be liable to confiscation and imposition of penalty. Let's give you some background to it. While supply of services have no impact because there is no transportation, etc. But for goods in the erstwhile law, whether it was customs, you import any goods, or under excise when you manufacture and remove goods from your factory, these provisions were not applicable. So because those were central levies. Some of the state VAT laws did have some e-way bill kind of provisions where they had the requirement to furnish e-way bills at the state borders were, and they were always cluttered and crowded with trucks lined up. So with advent of GST, it was hoped that these checkposts will be removed and this issue will get resolved. But after these provisions 129 and 130 were inserted and e-way bill provisions were brought into force, we saw a spurt in the litigation because the authorities started intercepting the vehicle or were in transit, and they started checking for the documents. Now, important is that if the documents have some mistake or there is any contravention for any purpose, as you saw in both these cases, 129 as well as 130, then the cases were booked. And now what 129 prescribes 129 prescribes is that the authority will issue a notice to the driver, will collect, ask him to pay the entire tax amount again with 100% penalty equal to tax there for 129. Section 130, on the other hand, requires not only penalty and it also qualifies for confiscation of goods and conveyance. So there are issues which reach to the courts, and I will just discuss those issues in the ensuing slides. Transport of goods in contravention of provision, as we saw, this is a big issue. And then authorities, government also came up 18, which prescribe for the procedure what should be the content of the document or the invoice and e-way bill, and what document should be available with the transporter, and how the authorities will proceed. So all those were prescribed in Circular 41, very onerous conditions, I must say. Then, as I mentioned, that there was payment of 100% tax and penalty. There was also another important aspect, and Puneet dealt with Section 17(5) restriction. So that 17(5)(I), clause I of Section 17(5) also debars credit to a recipient where tax has been paid under Section 129 or 130. So if the goods are detained and you are paying tax and penalty under 129 or 130, then your recipient of goods will be debarred from availing credit of such taxes. So we'll deal with these issues, and before we proceed, I can tell you that the strategy today, because immediately there were a spurt of writs, because the moment the goods are detained while in transit, the owner of the goods or the consignee of the goods was supposed to reach to the spot wherever the goods are and make the payment immediately. And in most cases, either the owner is not able to reach, or the authorities are not releasing the goods on submission of bond or bank guarantee, etc., for which is required for releasing the goods under CGST rules. Section 67 also dealt with the release of such goods on provisional basis. So these matters went to the courts. Various high courts took liberal view, and they allowed release of goods subject and substituted bank guarantee with other security, etc. And therefore, in one such matter where the Allahabad High Court ruled in favor of or allowed provisional release of goods to the taxpayer, the state of UP went to the Supreme Court ruled that since Section 129 and 130 are self-contained codes, and these are to prevent or any misuse of the provisions, or to prevent any clandestine sales, etc., of the goods. Therefore, courts should not generally intervene, and taxpayer should follow the appellate remedies and should follow the provisions of the laws, Rule 140 and 141, the adequate bank guarantees, etc., etc. So in that background, the high courts stopped giving relief, interim relief to the taxpayers, and therefore we will see how the litigation has come up in these matters. So as I was mentioning, because taxpayers were facing this ordeal under 129, 130, several writ petitions were filed, Rajasthan High Court and a couple of them before Allahabad High Court. 129 itself were challenged, saying that these operate in a predetermined manner. If you will notice, as I mentioned, that driver is served with a notice, and he is expected to reply, and his statement is taken, and immediately the officer decides the matter then and there. 14 days is the upper limit for release of goods. If within 14 days the payment is not deposited, etc., the goods are auctioned. The goods are forfeited by government and auctioned to recover the tax. Union provisions are there for which the assessees approach the courts for relief. Courts have entertained those writs. The matter is pending. Notices have been issued, and we will see how it unfolds. But this is going to be a long drawn litigation for sure, because the department has got the tool of 129, 130, whereas taxpayers are seeking relief from the courts. Secondly, as we saw that there is inherent violation, when there is hardly any hearing that is given, no written explanation. All the order that comes is a pre-printed order where the authority simply fills certain portions and they conclude the proceedings. So there is a grave violation. Now, our recommendation for taxpayer, number one, whenever such a matter is there, you send any goods, first and foremost, the endeavor should be that the documents are complete, error free. Second, even if some problem comes and if there is a gross approach courts, but if there is no such gross violation of natural justice or anything, then you must litigate it in their regular appellate proceedings. Or alternatively, you can challenge 129 and 130, like in the previous slide I showed that there are matters that are pending before Rajasthan and Allahabad high courts. We'll come up with some cases, because as we saw the second bullet here, that contravention of provision. Now, even if bona fide case could, I decide that classification of my product is X, which attracts lower rate of tax, and authority feels that no, the classification should be Y, which attracts higher rate of tax. So some matters like this, like Hindustan Coca-Cola and Daily Fresh Fruit India, both Kerala High Court. In these matters, some carbonated fruit drinks were being transported when the Kerala authorities detained them, saying that the IGST, so the documents were in order, everything was proper, but the taxpayer discharged is at 12%, whereas as per the authorities, the correct classification attracted IGST at the rate of 28%. Based on this, the authority detained the goods. The taxpayer went to the High Court saying that this is a bona fide classification issue. Rate of tax cannot be the basis under 129 or 130 action, and such detention is unwarranted and without jurisdiction. So the High Court ruled in favor of the taxpayer, saying that in case the authority in Kerala feels that the classification is erroneous, at best they can prepare document and send information to the concerned jurisdictional officer in the state from where the goods were dispatched, who paid the IGST. And beyond that, the Kerala authority would have no jurisdiction. They said that these are machinery provisions. They cannot be read in a manner which any kind of discrepancy like this, and therefore courts ruled in this manner. Next case is Umia Enterprise and KP Sugandha. These are Kerala High Court and Chhattisgarh High Court. Again, these are cases of bona fide dispute. So what happened in Umia? While the invoice mentioned CGST and SGST, the e-way bill mentioned IGST, and it was interstate supply. IGST was payable, but there was a clerical error, and court held that such clerical error 129 detention or seizure. Likewise, in KP Sugandha, the value mentioned in the invoice was less than MRP, and authorities detained the goods based on that, saying that the less IGST has been paid. Again, the court held that even if there is a doubt, you can prepare a report and send, but you cannot detain goods based on that, because MRP is for end consumer. It does not mean that B2B you cannot have lower value. Lead to any cause for detention of goods. We come to some negative rulings. 130. Sorry, this is again a positive ruling under 130 confiscation. So we have Himachal Pradesh Appellate Authority ruling. So in this case, what had happened? The truck was intercepted, and in the e-way bill, the truck number was incorrect. There were 2 digits which were wrong in that number. Circular 41 came, and there were a lot of issues around that. the authorities, lot of representations went to the authority, and eventually they issued another circular 64, which gave some room for liberty, saying that in case of minor mistakes such as 2-digit mistake in the truck number, 129 detention and 130 confiscation should not be invoked. At best, the authority can may impose penalty of 500 rupees. Based on this circular, the appellate authority said that 129 proceedings should not have been invoked. Yet the authority said that as in terms of the circular, it imposed 500 rupees general penalty under CGST and 500 under SGST. Another contrary ruling is Arunodaya. Here, what was happening? This is an Andhra Pradesh ruling, and some goods were 440 bags of sugar were transported from Karnataka to Arunodaya in. When the authorities intercepted the vehicle, the number of bags were only 150, not 440, which were initially showing in the invoice. And when Arunodaya came forward, they said that no, while the goods were in transit, they received some purchase order from some customers. So those goods were delivered to those customers, and these 150 bags are also going to be delivered to other customers. But neither there was any invoice for the same, nor there was to ship to arrangement. So this circular 41, which I mentioned, clearly provides that what kind of details should be there and how the invoice should be prepared, and all those details were missing. And so the appellate authority in these facts and circumstances held that here it cannot be ruled out that the goods were actually were being suppressed, and therefore these Arunodaya prepared invoice after detention, after the authorities intercepted, the next day they prepared invoices. These are all afterthought to escape from liability, and therefore they did not agree with this, and they maintained the appeal. They rejected the appeal. Coming further, because there were a lot of issues concerning interpretation of 129 and 130, what is the scope, what are the requirements, how these will be implemented. So Gujarat dealt with these issues and said that one, they start with non-obstantive clause, so they are independent of each other and they are mutually exclusive. Both proceedings can be undertaken simultaneously, or section 130 proceedings, which is confiscation, can follow section 129 proceedings, either ways. Secondly, Gujarat High Court also held that section 130 requires intent. There should be intent to evade, and therefore he cannot intercept the vehicle or confiscate the goods merely on suspicion. He must record reasons in writing, reason to believe in writing, before arriving at any conclusion whether to detain the goods or confiscate the goods and issue notice for under section 130. These reasons to believe can then be examined even by the appellate authorities. So section 129 and 130, the court held that cannot be invoked in bona fide cases, like we discussed earlier. So valid laws which can be used to invoke these provisions. In the case of zero discharge, which was a Kerala High Court, what had happened is that the goods were detained under section 129. The taxpayer paid the tax and penalty under section 129 as demanded by the officers, but the officers refused to account for the tax that he paid under 129 against his GST, by quoting section 17(5) restriction. So the taxpayer approached the Kerala High Court, and Kerala High Court held that 17(5) restrictions applies on the recipient and not on the supplier. So in this case, zero discharge, whatever tax they paid under 129, it was their output tax liability which could not be denied. So they remanded the matter to authorities with direction to account for the tax in the taxpayer's account. We conclude our session on second webinar relating to all the seizure, confiscation, etc. We will have in round 3, our webinar 3, we will cover various topics relating to audit, seizure, attachment, show cause notices, appeals and recovery, general penalties, concurrent jurisdiction, repeal and savings clauses, advance rulings, etc. And these we will have the session we will have on August 27, 2020. We request everyone to keep tuned in for the same, and if there are any questions we can take, because I did not see any question being raised so far. Just 1 minute, I will just give me a sec. I will just look at I can okay, so section 50 interest issue was taken up by Anshika. I'm happy to inform that in the 39th GST Council minutes meeting, the minutes are out, and what the authority has held is that effective July 1, 2017, the proviso which has been inserted will be effective. I'll just check if there are any other any question.
DK, there is
all right. So if
there's no other question, yeah, we just checked.
Yeah, there is no other question. Yeah. So thank you everyone for the participation. Thank you, and keep track of our webinars, and you'll find them very enriching, and we'll see you in our webinar 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.